There we go. All right. Welcome and thank you all of you for joining today's webinar. My name is Dr. Sofia Wenzler and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and also the clinical lead here at SkinPick, the online therapy program that is bringing this webinar to you. And today we're going to talk about people pleasing and skin picking, the cost of always saying yes. I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then at the end, we're going to have a Q&A session. So I want to really encourage you to stick around until the end. Also, because if you then decide to sign up for SkinPick, we're also going to have a promo code that's going to give you $100 off your first subscription. Um, I'm going to start by doing a little test with you where you can check where you stand on the people pleasing scale and whether this is a pattern that you might or might not have. Then we're going to talk about where this pattern comes from. I'm going to use those two terms, people pleasing and approval seeking, interchangeably because I think people pleasing is more like used in the common language, whereas when we actually talk about the psychological pattern, we oftentimes refer to it as approval seeking. So we're going to talk about the origins, then we're going to talk about how approval seeking and skin picking can be connected, whether it makes sense to reduce people-pleasing behavior, what are the advantages and disadvantages, and if you want to reduce it, what can you do? Then we're going to conclude and jump into the Q&A section. You can, by the way, post questions already now in the Q&A section. You can do it at the end of the session. I'm going to answer as much as I can, but please don't raise your hand. Just write your question down in the Q&A section. Even if after my answer you have a follow-up question, I usually get to that. Write it all down there, please. Okay, so are you a people pleaser? Maybe some of you already have the idea that they might have this pattern or might not have it, but there's actual clinically validated questionnaires. And I took a short section about approval seeking out of one that is quite popular and well validated. And so there are 5 statements, and I want you to go through them with me if you want to check. And for each statement, rate how much the statement applies to you on a scale from 1, completely untrue of me, to 6, describes me perfectly. Let's go. The first one. It is important to me to be liked by almost everyone I know. On a scale from 1 to 6, how much does that apply to you? Try to write it down on your phone or on a sheet of paper. The next one. I change myself depending on the people I'm with, so they'll like me more. My self-esteem is based mostly on how other people view me. Even if I don't like someone, I still want him or her to like me. Unless I get a lot of attention from others, I feel less important. Okay, so now you should have 5 ratings. You can now sum those up and then divide the sum by 5. And now you can basically evaluate whether you're above average in terms of people pleasing, because we know that if we take those 5 questions and then create an average, then a non-clinical sample, meaning a huge group of people who don't have psychological disorders, would on average score a 2.74 for those 5 statements. So if, for example, your score would be a 4, then you're significantly above average, and that might be a pattern that's relevant to you. Here are some more examples of statements that, if you highly agree with them, that would be an indicator of a people-pleasing pattern. I spend a lot of time on my physical appearance so people will value me. Accomplishments are most valuable to me if other people notice them. I'm so focused on fitting in that sometimes I don't know who I am. I find it hard to set my own goals without taking into account how others will respond to my choices. And sometimes those others don't even have to be there. They're just in your head. That's enough already. When I look at my life decisions, I see that I made most of them with other people's approval in mind. Okay. So this is a fairly common pattern also. And one of the main questions that is also, I think, relevant for therapy is where does it even come from? And those patterns usually start developing very early in childhood. And the theory behind it is that we all have core emotional needs. We all have needs that our care primary caretakers have to meet in order for us to feel balanced and to be to for our mental health to be high. In order for us to be happy and balanced, let's say it like that. Okay, so there are core emotional needs that have to be met. And if some of those needs are not met, then we develop patterns that then later on can cause problems in life. Okay, this is going to make much more sense soon, I promise. So those core emotional needs can be all kinds of things, but I really like this structure in terms of as an introduction to understand what that even means for emotional needs. So you see on the top, that is the most important emotional need that we have as humans, secure attachment. It also forms very, very early in life. So that means as a child feeling safe, stable, nurtured, and accepted, right? That's very important. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's the need for autonomy, competence, and sense of identity, the feeling that I can achieve things, that I am my own person with my own qualities, which kind of then develops a little bit later as we kind of detach from our parents and form our own lives and identity gradually throughout life. Then on the left side, you see the need for spontaneity and play that would also include all kinds of sensual experiences, sexuality. That's a need that a lot of people, when I ask them, forget. We as adults, we forget that that is an emotional need we have. In the middle, we have the need for realistic limits and self-control, which would mean that the world as we know it has rules and some sort of predictability that's very important for children. Obviously, they might not like the rules, but they still need them to know what consequences they can expect from their behaviors. And then on the right side, and that's the one that's relevant to us today, is the need to freely express valid needs and emotions. And that's one that is sometimes tricky to understand, right? For some people, it also seems connected to our need to be loved and accepted and safe, but it is actually something else. It means that we in our environment feel seen with all of our emotions and all of our needs. So we can have parents or primary caretakers that really, really love us, but don't see all the colors and all the parts of us and don't give attention or love to all of those parts. And that's where the people-pleasing pattern can develop. I'm going to explain this further, obviously, and also give you examples. So our need to be seen and get attention for who we truly are is kind of an evolutionary need almost. Attention for a child is incredibly important. A child will do almost whatever it takes to get attention from their children. And that's an evolutionary drive because evolutionarily we would not survive without our parents' attention and care, right? So, in whichever way our parents will give attention, that's what I'm going to do as a child. I'm going to find out exactly what I have to do to get this attention, and I'm going to do that over and over again. And what happens then is when, for example, children are raised in a context of being chronically overlooked, such as in a large family, and they don't get the attention um, that they need, or if children are neglected with parents, for example, who have psychological problems themselves, then they will develop those patterns that later on in life cause problems to kind of still get this attention from their parents. And there's a third kind of concept of where it comes from, still in the same line, that I personally find the most common in my private practice is children who get attention only for a certain part of themselves. So, for example, if you have parents that have really high expectations or that themselves are really high performers, then they might give specific attention to a child when it shows the side of them that is achieving, that tries hard, that is likable, right? But the moment a child might find and show another side, for example, a side that struggles with something, or an angry side or an oppositional side, then they might not get the attention that they need. And so those children learn over time, okay, I am loved and accepted in my environment if, that's really important, if I hide my difficulties, if I suppress my anger, if I don't show my sadness, if I do the things that my parents find interesting. And that's what kind of what they need in their core family in this environment to survive, to, to get the love and attention from their parents that they crave so badly. So it's basically learned behavior that was necessary once, but then later on in life can become problematic. And we're going to talk about that, obviously. Just to make it a little bit more graspable, here is an example. Paula. Paula was the middle child in a large family with six siblings. Her parents were loving but overwhelmed, often too busy managing the household to give each child individualized attention. So that's very important. Paula was not loved. Her parents loved her very much. They just didn't have the capacity to give her the attention she needed. Since there were so many children, Sarah felt she had to compete for love, praise, and recognition. She noticed that the siblings who behaved well, got good grades, or helped around the house received more praise and attention. If she cried, complained, or expressed her own needs, she often was told, "Stop being dramatic. There are more important things to worry about." So this part of her, by the way, that is focused on her own needs, on Paula's needs, that complains or cries because something is not okay, is being suppressed. It's being shut down because the parents don't have the resources or the time or the patience to deal with this part. So Paula will gradually learn to put this part away and show other sides of herself. So wanting to be noticed and appreciated, Paula learned that the best way to gain approval was by being helpful, agreeable, and obedient. And she needed to learn that in the environment she grew up in, right? If she hadn't learned that, she wouldn't have gotten the attention from her parents that she needed. So it makes a lot of sense that this is what happened. But later on in life, she might, that might cause problems or hold her back. So it's a learned behavior that was necessary once and becomes problematic later. Very important. So now we know what that can look like in a specific example. It's also very important to understand what happens inside a person when this pattern is triggered. So, when the pattern is triggered in moments where I feel like another person disapproves of what I'm doing, is not happy with what I'm doing, in a moment where I feel, oh, someone might be angry at me, I might not live to anyone up to someone's attention, or I'm not being seen as worthy in another person's eyes, automatic thoughts and assumptions come up. And those assumptions can take all kinds of shapes and forms. It can sound like something like my worth depends on others' opinions of me. Conflict or disagreement means rejection, right? If someone's mad at me, that means I'm going to be rejected. If I say no, people will stop liking me. Making mistakes means people will think less of me. But basically, you can boil it down to the idea of being loved, accepted, liked, or worthy is connected to an if. I have to perform, I have to do something to be liked, accepted, loved, or worthy. I have to work for it. Just me being me is not enough. That's at the core um, for people who have this pattern. And it comes with an automatic emotional response. If I think that way, I will regularly live with a fear of abandonment or disapproval. I will regularly be afraid that other people might not like me, reject me, or even leave me. And if I don't live up to those standards that I've internalized in childhood, then I might also feel ashamed or embarrassed. And this is a very difficult state to be in. It's almost like an inner conflict, right? When you think that way and feel that way, you kind of want to do something to relieve this tension. Okay, so that's why it's called a pattern. It involves thoughts and assumptions, emotions, and then that boils down to a certain behavior. And interestingly, not everyone who has this approval seeking inner conflict actually then also engages in people pleasing behavior. There are actually three different kind of categories of behaviors that you can show to live with this inner expectation of I have to do something, perform in a certain way to be loved, accepted, and worthy. Um, and those three kind of reactions can neatly be paired with the idea of fight, fright, fall, fight, flight, or freeze. Fight, the three F's. F's. Um, so freeze would be a surrender reaction. Flight, we call that avoidance. And fight, we call that overcompensation. So let's look at an example. Let's say I am the person who has this approval seeking pattern, and a friend asks me whether I want to go out tonight. My first reaction is no, I don't. I'm tired. Um, That's a very, very realistic example. However, my approval seeking pattern is triggered, and those automatic thoughts and assumptions come up. If I say no, will she still like me? Will she think I'm a boring person? Will she think I'm a friend who doesn't care? Will she not ask me again because she's going to be disappointed of me? So I immediately override this first instinctual um, response of like, I don't want to. That's actually focused on my own needs and face towards the needs of the other person. But then if I'm in overcompensation mode, I will go to a different place. I will not accept those automatic thoughts and assumptions. I will actually go to the opposite. I will say, no, I don't need anyone's approval. Approval is a trap. I don't need it. Even better, I will push people away so they can't judge me. And then I might answer with like, no, I don't want to go. I don't have to say yes to everything. I have my own plans. Bye. Some kind of angry, overcompensating answer that kind of pushes the person away. And at the same time, I don't have to deal with their disapproval. Then an avoidance reaction would be more something like, I feel if I don't say yes, she's going to like me less. So I'm, for example, going to ignore the text and then later say, I'm so sorry, I missed it. So she can't really be mad at me because it's just a mistake, It's not really that I didn't want to go. I would have gone if I had read the text on time. It might also look something like unhealthy self-soothing. For example, I do want to say no, but at first I drink a glass of wine for courage, and then I say no, but then I don't have to feel the fear that it actually evokes. Or getting another person to say no for me. So, for example, answering something, yeah, I would love to, but my husband is sick, so I have to take care of him, for or something like that. So I'm avoiding the situation and I'm avoiding the uncomfortable feelings that it evokes in me. And only the surrender reaction is basically the one that leads to this people-pleasing behavior. And that can look like saying what you think people want to hear. For example, in that case, agreeing and going out with this friend, although you're really tired and you don't want to. Having different versions of oneself depending on who one is with, difficulty making decisions without someone signing off of them, feeling unsure about what your real tastes or preferences are, because this first initial reaction of I don't want to go, if you get into this approval seeking pattern again and again and again, at some point you might even have trouble feeling your own needs and wants in the moment because you're so focused on the other person. Adopting the tastes or hobbies of loved ones rather than your own, feeling hurt when others disagree with you, having difficulty saying no, that's obviously a very common one, and apologizing too often, also very common. Okay, I hope now we all have a firm grasp of what approval seeking means and how it's a pattern of thoughts, assumptions, emotions, and then a certain behavior. Now let's see what research can tell us about the connection between approval seeking, this pattern, and skin picking. So, just a quick reminder, right? Approval seeking as a pattern comes from an emotional need not being met in childhood. In this case, it's the freedom to express valid needs and emotions. Actually, approval seeking obviously is not the only pattern that we learn in childhood in order to survive and strive the best we can in our environment that later on we find is not that helpful. There is actually 18 different such patterns, which approval seeking is only one of them. All of them are based on unmet needs in childhood. And just so you know, we all have them, even with the most amazing parents. I'm a parent now, right? We try to do the best we can. We're not going to get it right all the time. There's always going to be something, that didn't go well that later on our children have to learn to deal with. Um, yeah, but so there are 18 of those patterns. I'm not going to go into all of them, but there's a really interesting research study from 2020 where researchers analyzed how those different patterns are connected to skin picking. And they actually didn't only check how those 18 patterns are related to skin picking, they checked how they are examined, how those are related to different subtypes of skin picking, meaning automatic skin picking, focused skin picking, and mixed skin picking, which is automatic and focused. And there are three patterns that were actually strongly related to all three kinds of skin picking, all three subtypes of skin picking. And those patterns are mistrust, abuse, failure, and approval seeking. So there is a really, really strong connection, or really, really strong. There is definitely a connection between skin picking and approval seeking. Just quickly, if you're curious about those other two patterns, so we not can go into it in too much detail, but the mistrust abuse pattern means that people have that usually grew up in an environment that was not safe for them, possibly abusive, whether that's physical, sexual, or psychological. It can mean that you grew up in a family where you couldn't trust others because they were lying or manipulative. It can come from cases of severe bullying in childhood, but it basically means that you feel like you can't trust your surroundings and that you're constantly vigilant because you always feel like you're almost like your radar is off and you don't know when someone is going to double cross you or kind of use your trust. So that is a really difficult pattern. Obviously, that doesn't mean that everyone who suffers from skin picking has this pattern. It just means that there's a connection, just like not everyone who suffers from skin picking will have an approval seeking pattern. Not at all. There's just statistically a higher likelihood that you have this pattern. And it kind of coincides with the fact that also the likelihood of having experienced trauma in childhood is higher in people who suffer from skin picking disorder than in those who don't. The second pattern is called failure, and it basically means that you have this deep belief that you will fail or are fundamentally inadequate in comparison to others. Um, and that can come from learning difficulties in childhood, for example, suffering from dyslexia or ADHD when it's not diagnosed, or other factors that held you back in childhood. It might come from parents being really high achievers and having high expectations where you constantly feel like you can never meet them or never live up to them. Um, and then we have the approval seeking pattern. And you might ask yourself, okay, good, so, or not good, but now we know there's a connection between skin picking disorder and approval seeking, but where does it come from? What does that actually mean? What are reasons for this connection? And that's something that wasn't yet examined by research, but there's several hypotheses of how those could be connected. And the idea is because the approval seeking pattern develops so early in childhood that it's kind of the approval seeking pattern was there first and increased the chance of the person also developing a skin picking disorder. And one idea is that the common denominator is body image. So if you have this approval seeking pattern or people pleasing behavior, then appearance might be very important to you. So you might be more likely to try to resolve imperfections in your skin because you think that appearance is directly tied to your worth in others' eyes. And then it just sets the stage for more preoccupation with your skin and imperfections, which can then possibly lead to repetitive behaviors such as skin picking in an attempt to fix, the imperfections. Another possible explanation would be that people with an approval seeking pattern rely on external validation. They feel good about themselves if they get the external signal that they're allowed to feel that way. So that means that in some of the cases, we're not going to get it right. We don't always get this external validation, and that might be very upsetting. It can lead to stress. And then skin picking might be just a strategy to serve as a coping mechanism to self-soothe those overwhelming emotions. The same goes for the suppressed emotions that we see in people who have this people pleasing pattern. So remember, there is always a primary reaction. My friend asked me, do I want to go out? I don't. There is a primary reaction. I don't want to go out, but I suppress those emotions in order to please, in order to be the best possible friend I can be. And those emotions are still there. And then in the end, they add up and I have to regulate them somehow. And that also might be a place where the risk for skin picking behavior is higher. And then lastly, there's this common element of shame, both in approval seeking and in skin picking. So people who have the approval seeking pattern, if they don't get it right, if they feel another person disapproves of them, doesn't like them, doesn't think they are worthy, then they might feel a deep sense of shame. Um, and that is a very uncomfortable state to be in, just like when you feel shamed after picking your skin. And just like with skin picking, where it can lead just to another episode, also here, skin picking might come in as a coping mechanism to self-soothe. Okay, should you stop? Now, I know that generally we talk about people pleasing as in something that is not good, that we do want to stop. In my experience, um, and I also want to remind you that people pleasing in and of itself, approval seeking is not necessarily a bad thing. It's only like sometimes we do something, we put our own needs to the side and do something with focus on the other person to please them, to make them happy, to connect with them. And that's fine. We all do it, right? It's only a problem if this is mostly what you do, if you're feeling compelled to do it, if you almost don't know how to do something else, right? So It's only a problem if you engage in this behavior again and again and again. But in my experience, when I work with people who have this pattern, there oftentimes is resistance because it's not um, all bad. Okay, it's more complex than that. It's a whole cycle. There's a trigger, a primary reaction, a secondary reaction, and but that's very, very important, short-term and long-term consequences. So look at that. Let's look at those. Let's say your partner suggests doing something you don't enjoy, right? That will be the trigger. And you have a primary reaction again, possibly of, I don't want to do that. That's something I don't enjoy. Like in the example before. But then fear for abandonment might come up. Will he like me less? Will he love me less? Will he think less of me if I say no? So then, in terms of, I engage in this people-pleasing behavior and say yes instead of no. Okay, that's where we are so far. Now, let's look at the consequences because actually, in the short term, there are positive consequences. I will feel safety and relief, but I will feel safety and relief. Um, and there is a list of common advantages that clients usually tell me that they feel this approval seeking pattern brings with it. So they feel like, no, but like if I'm this comfortable person who, always tries to make people around me happy, then I have stronger relationships. I avoid confrontation. I live in harmony. There's no conflict. No one's mad at me. I'm very likable, and I'm this empathetic person who just loves to give and give and give. And that's true. There's a lot of short-term benefits, right? But if we look closely and if we look at what that does to our relationships in the long run, it actually hurts our relationships. It actually damages our relationships. And that completely defeats the purpose because I engage in the people-pleasing behavior in order to improve relationships because I want to avoid confrontation, but it often backfires. So let's look at this more closely at those long-term consequences. So, for example, we think that people-pleasing behavior will lead to stronger relationships, but what are those relationships where we mainly focus on another person's needs, right? Those are one-sided relationships. And I always want to remind you, think about those. If you have this people-pleasing pattern, think about what this will feel like for the other side, right? For example, if you have a partner where every night you ask, what do you want to eat? Then they always answer, whatever you want, right? What would that mean? They're not showing their wants and needs. There is some part of them that you're missing. Also, it's exhausting. You always have to decide, right? So it doesn't always feel good to be in this relationship that is one-sided. You're avoiding confrontations, yes, but you're also avoiding the necessary confrontations. And that's sometimes a hard pill to swallow because for people who engage in people-pleasing behavior regularly, that means that they're probably very afraid of confrontation. Confrontation will evoke a huge fear of being left or losing the relationship. But that's not true. You need confrontation. You need to fight with your partner and put things on the table. That will be beneficial to your relationship in the long run. Think about it again. Think about it if you were the other part, right? You were in a relationship with a person who has this approval seeking pattern, and now you do something that bothers your partner. Wouldn't you want them to tell you? When you want to know? Because then you could defend yourself or apologize. You would not, if you love that person, you want them to tell you if something's not okay. You would want them to tell you if they need something, if you're stepping on their toes, right? Because that's what a stable relationship needs. Yes, if you are constantly focused on the other person and try to please them, then that will create a lot of harmony in the long run, but it can easily backfire because you're suppressing your anger. You might oftentimes what I hear with those clients is, yes, I understand the other person. I know where they're coming from. Yes, this hurt me. Yes, this bothers me, but like I know why they're doing it. Why bother, possibly fighting with them to stand up for myself. And that's because you're very empathetic, but also it's highly avoidant behavior. The fact that someone accidentally stepped on your toe doesn't mean it didn't hurt and doesn't mean that it shouldn't happen again. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't talk about it. And if you constantly go to this place of like pushing your own needs and emotions away, this might possibly at some point just explode uncontrollably in your face. Or at some point you will just not want to be with this person anymore and subconsciously manipulate or sabotage the relationship and leave it. And the other person doesn't even know what happened because you didn't tell them. Um, yes, you're very likable if you're pleasing other people and are very focused on your needs, but you're not being authentic. They don't really get to know you. And then the last one, that's really important. So when you have this really good radar or those antennas for another person's needs, right? It does make you really empathetic, and that's not a short-term benefit. You get really good at reading other people. And I always tell my clients that that is a superpower. That's amazing. That's kind of the upside of this whole thing because there's an upside to everything. Um, but you want to be in control of it, right? That's not, you want to be able to choose whether you are going to engage with the feelings, emotions, or needs of the other person or be more focused on your own. And if you engage in people-pleasing behavior too much, then at some point you might even be disconnected to yourself. You might not even be able to feel anymore what you need and want, right? So it has to be balanced. But it does make you a really empathetic person, and it can come in handy in some situations. Okay, so what to do if you feel that you have this approval seeking pattern and you want to do something about it? I do want to tell you that the roots of this thing really usually run deep. So I don't find it realistic to really work on it and get get to those roots without therapy. I mean, I am a psychologist. I deeply believe in this process, and that can be very complex and emotional. So if you really want to work on it, I would really advise you to seek therapy. I know from our therapists here at SkinPick that oftentimes once we get through the more technical part of the program where we work on the skin picking symptoms, and once the symptoms have decreased significantly, those are the places where clients go with our therapists. Um, where does it come from? How is it related to my personality, to other patterns that I have? And that work can also be really meaningful. So, yeah, I really recommend doing this work with a therapist. But just as you know, like I always want to give you something to take away from those webinars we give here. So just some basic ideas of where to even start if you want to work on this pattern. So it's a whole pattern. It's not one moment in time, right? And if you work on it, there's different stages of change that you can go to. So identifying the pattern, understanding, wow, this is something that I involuntarily, sometimes automatically do, and I want to stop. Right? That's you're understanding something fundamental about yourself, and that's already the first step towards change. Once you're there, the next step would be to build a lot of awareness to when this pattern comes up, right? So this awareness is most likely going to manifest first after you show the people pleasing behavior. So the next step would be, okay, now I know this is a pattern I want to change. Oh, it just happened. It just happened. I just had this confrontation with my coworker and I apologized for something I don't even want to apologize for. Why did I apologize, right? And then you notice afterwards. The next step would be to realize it. why that happens. Oh, I'm just apologizing. Why am I apologizing? I shouldn't be apologizing. The frustrating part is that here, sometimes you still will not be able to change the behavior. So notice enduring is the next step. And then acting differently. Actually managing to catch yourself while you do it and then have an alternative. And that works really, really well if you know your triggers. If you can anticipate situations. Okay, I'm going to have this conversation with my boss. I know he's very pushy. I know I tend to agree to do tasks that I don't want to do. If he asks me, I'm going to react in this and that way. You go through it in your head, even role play it with a friend. And then you can be as prepared as possible in the situation, but still, it's something that takes a lot of time because think about it. You've had this pattern since you were a child, however long that is. We're not going to change it um, in a few weeks. And remember, the goal is not, that's very important, feeling comfortable while you do that. Saying no to this task that your boss wants to do most likely will make you feel scared, maybe even guilty. Change doesn't always feel good. It's gonna make you feel good and it's gonna make you better in the long run, but completely expect and accept that there's gonna be difficult feelings on the way. Also, kind of a fear that I encounter with my clients in my private practice often is that will I become a selfish person? Right? Right? If I'm too focused on my own needs and emotions, I might become selfish. Now, that has never happened, at least in my experience. And even more so when my clients say that, I'm like, go for it. Just be selfish for a little bit. It would be so healing for you. Just go to the other side of the spectrum, live there a little bit, and then it's going to balance itself out. But actually, in my experience, it doesn't happen. Yes, and you're not going to succeed immediately. It's a process of change. Just be patient with yourself and remember every step, even the smallest ones, are steps forward. Oh, we're already out of time, but I really want to go through this quickly. And once you're in this position where you are aware of the pattern and can catch yourself in the act, you can try to make a plan of how to tackle this pattern. And one really good approach that comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is to build an exposure hierarchy. That means for a certain amount of time, let's say 1 or 2 weeks, you're going to note every people-pleasing behavior that you witnessed yourself doing and that you want to change. Right? And then you're going to build a hierarchy defined by the distress level that you would feel if you stopped that behavior that you do want to stop. This could look something like this, okay, from 1 to 10. So, for example, 10 would be highest distress level. If I were to start setting boundaries with my in-laws, if I were to stop pleasing them and would, for example, refuse an invitation, that would cause a distress level of 10. Wow, that would be super hard. Okay. An easier example might be returning a meal in a restaurant that looks like it's around a 2 or a 3. Okay, if I would return a meal in a restaurant, that would be a 2 or a 3. And kind of take all of those different situations and um, um, structure them in this hierarchy. And then start, by actively seeking out those situations, for example, going to the restaurant and asking them to take your meal back intentionally, and start with situations that are around a stress level of 3 or 4, because that is a challenge. It's not too easy, but it's doable. And the magic is that if you do that a lot, if you work on your 3 to 4 um, distress level situations a lot, the other ones that in the beginning you put at a 10 will, with time and exercise, become a 9, and then they will become an 8, and gradually more um, more different ways to set boundaries um, will kind of seem possible to you with exercise. You can do this kind of strategy with every fear. It can be very effective. All right, so that's it for today. Let's conclude. Approval seeking is a learned behavior. It's a learned behavior that you needed when you were a child, but that now can cause problems. It basically always comes with the idea of an if. You feel that you have to meet certain standards to be accepted, loved, or valued, in connection with a deep fear of conflict or abandonment. People will leave me, think less of me, not accept me if I don't please. People suffering from skin picking disorder have a higher likelihood to also show this pattern of um, people pleasing, according to research. Very likely, um, a people pleasing pattern or approval seeking pattern can lead to skin picking disorder, but it doesn't necessarily have to. It's just a statistical correlation. People pleasing can lead to a relief and feeling safe in the short term, but it has negative consequences for the person and the relationship in the long run. It's not good for the relationship in the long run. That's very important. In order to stop, it is important to increase awareness for the triggers and moments it happens, and then gradually face your fears to create new learning experiences and realize that you can stop and that in the long run, it can be good for you. All right, that's it for today. As always, we have a lot of free resources you can use. Um, Obviously, the webinars, we have online forums and blogs on our website, skinpick.com. Please check out our Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok accounts. And if you want to sign up to SkinPick, um, where we offer an evidence-based therapy with professional guidance, then you have a discount code here, webinar 100, that will give you a $100 discount on your first subscription. All right. Okay. Let's see. We have about 10 to 15 minutes to get to your questions. Okay, the first question. Other than fidget toys, which don't work for me, what can I do to help me either prevent or stop picking? Um, that's a very good question. I know fidget toys are something that is commonly associated with skin picking disorder, but is actually only one strategy in a group of strategies that we call competing response, right? So what you want to do is replace the picking behavior with another response, with an alternative behavior. And that can be taking a fidget toy into your hands. It can be all kinds of other things as well, though. It can be, for example, if you're engaging in a sedentary activity on the couch or at work, it can be getting up, it can be drinking a glass of water, it can be sitting on your hands, it can be slightly what do you call this? Touching some kind of fabric that you have on your on you, some kind of clothing. It can be many, many, many different things. I just had a client. I thought this was a really cool thing. What she did is she took little how do you call them? Pimple uh, patches, right? She orders them online in bulks of 500. You put them on the parts where you tend to pick, and then they're in the shape of stars, so you can kind of scratch at them a little bit, but you're not hurting your skin. And at the same time, it's protecting the part that you want to heal. So you can be really creative with this. And another idea would be to create barriers so you can't reach the skin. So you could wear gloves or you could cover the part of the skin. So actually, like, yeah, those patches could also be called barriers. Yeah, so there's a lot of different options. And basically, if you want to learn that, then I don't want to advertise all the time, but skin pick is that's exactly what we're doing, finding the strategies that work for you. doesn't make much sense to me that skin picking is due to hating imperfections because the picking makes the skin worse. I look at my nails and hate how they look and pick at them or bite at them. So why can't I tell myself that I am actually making the imperfections stick around longer by picking? That's also such a good point. If you look at it, that's how it feels. Why would it doesn't make sense in the long run? It causes problems, right? It makes your skin less imperfect, but it's this, who hasn't popped a pimple, right? We all have, and we've all made this experience of then afterwards, maybe having a little wound, and then it takes a long time healing, but we still do it. There's some kind of short-term relief to it, and in the short and we see the imperfection, we want to do something with it, even if intellectually we know in the long run it doesn't help. But in the short term, it's relieving, and in the short term, you feel like you do something with it. Sometimes you do scratch off a little piece of your skin, right, that was bothering you, and it doesn't even cause long-term imperfections, but it leads to other spots on your skin. So it's about differentiating between the short-term and the long-term consequences of what you're doing. And oftentimes we're focused more on the short-term consequences while we're doing it. That's why it's so hard to tell yourself that I'm actually making the imperfections stick around longer by picking, because in the moment you're focused on what's going on in the moment, and your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that plans for the long run, is not active enough. And that's why oftentimes, for example, having a barrier there, right? The patches that I just described, obviously, I can take them off with a little bit of work and then still scratch my skin. But the barrier is just there to stop me for a second, take me out of my automatic or focused um, movement to scratch my skin and remind me, wait, there is something. I stop for a second. I can activate my prefrontal cortex and remember, oh, I didn't want to do it. I'm not saying that that's easy. It's just it gives you a chance to pause and remember exactly what you're saying. Like, I'm making my imperfections stick around longer right now. And then immediately have something else that you can do to then release the pressure and the urge to want to pick. Another person that related to my point of sometimes skin picking and approval seeking being related to body image. I realized that apparently spoke to or didn't spoke to some of you. I don't think it's because of my looks. As you were saying, this stems from stress and anxiety that triggered this. At least for me, it's a strong urge to do something, in this case, skin pick. And you're absolutely right. For a lot of people, it's not really about the look. There's different kinds of skin picking also. There's automatic skin picking, there's focused skin picking. Sometimes our hand just wanders to a point and it just starts, and we only notice once we're already doing it. And sometimes you just come home and you just know you want to go to the mirror and you want to pick because there's some kind of stress that you kind of build up during the day, and then you're like focused and you just lose yourself in this activity. So that's one of the things that makes skin picking or disorder so complex, because it can come, for some people it does come from the feeling like there's some kind of imperfection, but it also can have so many other different triggers. And that's why also I have this list of explanations of why possibly approval seeking and skin picking might be related. Okay. What is the connection between people pleasing and skin picking? I actually think I answered this during um, the during my presentation when I talked about how aspects such as emotion regulation, regulating suppressed emotions that we build up when we have this people-pleasing pattern, for example, can be relieved with this coping mechanism of skin picking. Um, I can just go back to that slide. And you, by the way, you can also rewatch this webinar, on or YouTube channel skinpick.com, or if you have some that someone you might think would profit from watching it, then you can send them the link. We're going to upload it probably by tomorrow. Are there any books, podcasts, or articles you recommend for those who want to learn more about skin picking, or perhaps resources to share with family members to help them understand? Thank you. Um, so I would definitely recommend our blog on our website, skinpick.com. We have an abundance of blog posts on all kinds of different aspects related to skin picking. Also, again, you can go to our YouTube channel for all of the webinars. We've been doing webinars, I think, since 2020 regularly. So there's a lot of them there. In the past year, I definitely did a webinar on how to support people who suffer from skin picking, specifically also how parents, for example, can support their children. So there's a lot of content and information there. There's also a book that I could recommend. Oops, just stop the sharing. Okay, well, we don't need it anymore. I'm gonna look up the title for you. So that book is called Overcoming Body-Focused Repetitive Behaviors. And it's by Charles Mansueto. That's also one that I can recommend. Okay. One more question, and we have time for that. Great. How much does a cluttered environment figure in staying stuck in the cycle of skin picking? How much does a cluttered environment contribute in staying stuck in the cycle of skin picking? Do you mean like if you're in a apartment where there is a lot of clutter and it's like kind of bothering you that it's not clean and tidy? That's a good question. I never thought about that. If I understand that correctly, we do know that there is a high rate of co-occurrence between skin picking and OCD. And I do have clients who suffer from both. And then they have being in an environment that is cluttered just leads to more stress, which then can lead to skin picking. And then instead of actually dealing with the clutter, you engage in more picking to relieve the stress that comes from the cluttered environment. So not in an OCD kind of way, but taking care of yourself and living in an environment where you feel comfortable will definitely contribute in a positive way to the skin picking. I mean, like, will not add to the skin picking and will affect this in a positive way. Okay, one last question. I think I'm in the notice people pleasing after and during stage, but sometimes it is hard to separate what is my primary need reaction versus my secondary reaction. How can we help separate these? Such a good question. It's so difficult. It's so difficult. It's not trivial at all because if this is a learned behavior that you've been practicing for decades, and that's oftentimes the case, then it can get really hard to understand what you want. And it's definitely a learning process. So, as a first step, I would recommend for you to leave the situation and be on your own. A lot of times it's hard to connect to yourself if there's another person around you. So even if, for example, you're, in an uncomfortable situation with a friend in a restaurant, let's say, just go to the bathroom. Just go to the bathroom for a second, take a few deep breaths and try to connect to yourself. Try to, for example, understand, okay, what am I feeling right now? What are my emotions? Connect to your body. Where am I feeling it? Do I feel heavy in my chest? That might mean that there's some kind of sadness. Do I feel tense? That might mean that there's some kind of anxiety, and try to distance yourself from the situation for a second to understand what you're feeling. And then once that becomes easier, you can try to do that in the situation as well. But it takes conscious effort and it takes you to connect to yourself. You could, another strategy that you could try is, if there was a good friend next to me right now, what would they think that I need? That sometimes helps you. Not that, your best friend might know you better than you, but this thought of like, what would a good friend tell me right now, oftentimes connects us to our healthy adult, to our prefrontal cortex, to yeah, to our healthy parts. And yeah, that might also be a helpful strategy. It doesn't have to be a good friend. It just has to be someone that you know loves you and cares for you. Okay, those were wonderful questions. Thank you so much. Um, this is it for today. Thank you, all of you, so much for joining the webinar. I hope I'm going to see you again for the next one. And I hope you're going to have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are in the world.